Today we are back in the South again. Last time we talked about sharecropping, and it was called Inching Away from Slavery. Now this particular version is subtitled Inching Back into Slavery, and it's about the same period of time from 1865 to 1945. It involves these same questions having to do with nothing but freedom or nothing but freedom. It has to do, again, with the same battleground that we've always been working in when we deal with these things. The Deep South, the emancipated people, the former masters. We've abolished the slave, but the master remains. This particular topic is one that shows you probably as clearly as any I can think of how historical muscle building, by going back, taking a deep dive into the past, can fortify and sharpen and direct your critical activist skills into issues that reverberate right into the moment today. Sharecropping and convict leasing, the subject of their last video and the subject of this video, take place simultaneously. Often they involve the same crops. But convict leasing is not sharecropping. Convict leasing is slavery by another name. The reason that I'm emphasizing slavery by another name is because a terrific historian by the name of Douglas Blackmon, B-L-A-C-K-M-O-N, wrote a book called exactly that. It's also been turned into a terrific documentary movie. And it's all about how slavery survived the Civil War. Now, it's really important to get over the idea that somehow, with emancipation and Reconstruction, slavery ended. It did not end. The reason that it didn't end has to do with a technical phrase in the Emancipation 13th Amendment that's called the exception clause. And the exception clause says everybody's in free except for people who are in jail for crimes that they have committed. In other words, you can't emancipate people out of prison with the 13th Amendment, or else you wouldn't have prisons. It's a perfectly sensible way to be able to manage this problem. But the problem with managing it this way is that the masters' descendants who remain read the exception clause and say, gee, if we can convict a lot of African American people of various crimes and put them into jail, then we can lease those prisoners out to private industry and we'll take their wages and they'll work for free. And that's called slavery, right? That's what convict leasing is. Now, you've seen enough pictures of convict leasing to see these guys in striped pants and shirts being supervised by white guards with shotguns. This particular picture is a picture that comes from Louisiana. And the reason it comes from Louisiana, and I know it does, is because behind you is not cotton, it's sugar. Sugar is, let's be clear about this, the opium of the 19th century. From the standpoint of it being the internationally traded commodity, it's like drugs. It goes all over the world. It's the new thing that creates raw calories for ordinary people. And starting in the 18th and 19th century, sugar is as world production and economy as cotton is, and a lot of books have been written about it. These guys are all involved with harvesting sugar on a plantation that is actually Angola Prison in Louisiana. Angola Prison is a very famous prison. It's a terrible place, together with other prisons that you know about in the South, all of which used to be private plantations until emancipation. When emancipation happened, the owners of these plantations turned them into state prisons and got fees from the state government to run them. They are basically privatized prisons. Remind you of anything that you know about today? Yes. And the men who are working in it are people who have been in prison for debt, who've been in prison for trumped up charges of one kind or another, and who are an unpaid labor force that walks around in chain gangs that use the same tools of punishment that the old master used. Whipping posts, cats of nine tails, tying people around barrels, all kinds of different things. Over the period of time from the 1870s on into the 1940s, convict leasing and prison industrial labor is something that makes money for the state and for private industry off the bodies of African American people who are bought and sold while in prison to other people. So we have a slave trade. Now, convict leasing is something that also is important for understanding for women. There are women's prisons as well. There's a wonderful book written by a scholar named Talithia LaFloria, who reveals exactly how all of this worked for African American women in the Deep South. And there's plenty of ways that you can learn about all this. The point is now that you've been able to put sharecropping together with the convict lease system, together with lynching, and together with the KKK, and together with the idea of segregating and stifling black politics in the South. All these different overlays and transfers give you a sense of the accumulated white law of gravity operating in the South, all over the place, so that while slavery is gone, and while resistance can be much more open or possible with negotiation as opposed to just plain master-slave relationships, the fact of the matter is we now have a complicated way of applying the law of gravity that works on a number of different levels here. How did the white South get away with this? Why was there no particular objection, except from African Americans like Ida B. Wells? This is a time when white people are not showing up except in the ways that I've been emphasizing. Yes, there's white dissent of one kind or another, but there is no civil rights movement to push back, together with Ida B. Wells, the aging Frederick Douglass, and other African Americans at the turn of the century like W.E.B. Du Bois, to actually create a counter response to this period, which is really considered the incredibly deep low point of African American history here in the United States. Famous black historian named Rayford Logan termed it the nadir, N-A-D-I-R, the absolute bottom of what it was like to be of dark skin and living in the United States. This period of time, from say about 1880, all the way on through the end of the Second World War. We've seen white Reconstruction set new terms for itself through sharecropping, through convict leasing. Angola Prison is still Angola Prison today, and you can go visit it. It's still working in much the same way that it used to. It's become a tourist spot. Lots of people like to go there and visit the museum so they can sit in the electric chair. There's a lot of awful stuff to have to go through in the history to develop the courage to face up to its implications for us. But once we have that history around us, we know that we didn't do it. We know that we're responsible for what lies behind it that comes into our own time. That takes imagination, that takes compassion, that takes empathy, if that's the term you like. The history brings the moral questions into our time in a way that we can see them clearly and to develop some courage to be able to speak back.